Everyone, welcome. I'm Carol Carter. I'm founder and CEO of Global Minded, and we're delighted to have you here for today's topic. And many of you we see every month at Dr. Ryan Ross's sessions. We have an incredible lineup of people today. And before we turn it over to Ryan, just want to mention a couple things. One, this is Black History Month, and we're really delighted in our programming with Dr. Ross and also in our newsletter every day to feature incredible contributors in the African American community. So if you haven't had a chance to read that newsletter, we'll be summarizing all of the people profiled on the last day of the month, so you can share that out with your networks and with your students. We also have our Global Minded Conference coming up. June 7th is our pre-conference for first generation students, and 8th and 9th is our conference. So we are all about connecting first gen poverty affected minoritized students to role models, mentors, internships, and jobs. We'll have about 1,100 different leaders here and people from all different sectors and all different backgrounds. So we hope you'll put that on your calendar. The early bird rate is available right now. That'll go up next month, but we very much look forward to seeing you all in person. And then we'll also look out on October 12th. We'll have our event at the United Nations, and that'll be called Transforming Financial Boundaries. So without further ado, it's my great honor to introduce Dr. Ryan Ross, who has led these sessions faithfully since the pandemic hit. And we had such a need to bring people together virtually. And since then, the Get Comfortable Being Uncomfortable series has grown. And today, his session is First and 10 from the 1 yard line, moving the educational justice and reparations ball forward in the Black community. So Dr. Ross, great to see you and welcome to all of your guests. Thank you so much for being here today.
Right on. Thanks, Carol. Good afternoon, everyone. Happy Black History Month. I say that with great excitement and frustration because every day is Black History, because Black history is American history. But since we have the month and we have your attention during these 28 days, we are back here to get you comfortable being uncomfortable with, I think, a really, really important topic. And before I go any further, I just want to take a moment and pause and just take a moment to recognize our Indigenous brothers and sisters whose land we are all upon. And I know we're in different places all around the country. And so rather than reading my land acknowledgement, I just want to have a moment of silence to recognize the land upon which we are on and the labors for those who were enslaved to move this capitalistic society forward. All right, thank you so much. So I'm excited to, as you know, we only have an hour, so we're gonna jump right in. And again, the goal of this conversation is not to bring you closure, right? It is to get you thinking. It is to probably make sure that you're a little uncomfortable at the time that we're done, but more importantly, to inform you and give you some more information about some of the things that are happening as we think about diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice, and how we can apply that to the work that we do every day. It's so important that we continue to build our own toolkit and knowledge around this, because we can't show up and help anyone until we begin to show up and help ourselves, and knowledge is a really, really important part of that. So I'm gonna get out of the way. I'm gonna give a very brief introduction of our guests and then allow them to introduce themselves, and we'll jump right into our conversation. And so first, I'd like to introduce Sade Cooper, who is from Colorado, who's here in Colorado with us. She is the executive director of Chic Collaborative Healing Initiatives in the Communities, and also the founder of the EBJC, which she'll probably talk about today. Then we have Eric McDonnell, who is the chairman of the Reparations Committee in San Francisco. Many of you have probably seen the work that he is doing and himself in the committee in the news lately. And then we have Dr. Chris Mathis, who is a lawyer by trade and a professor at the University of Iowa, but also in Virginia, and has been doing work all around the country and helping people and being a thought partner around reparation work. So I'm really, really excited. That was a brief introduction. Sade, I'm gonna come to you first to give you an opportunity to truly introduce yourself.
No, thank you for this. I'm truly honored to be here and to have this conversation because it's dear to my heart. It's where equity happens. It's where economic mobility happens, and so forth. As Dr. Ross stated, my name is Sade Cooper. I'm the co-founder and executive director of Collaborative Healing Initiative within Communities, a nonprofit that is really catered to the Black woman experience and Black youth experience. We operate in 4 areas. One is education, working with children around social, emotional, and cultural learning. Workforce opportunities, because we are 2G, where we provide women and pay them a livable wage to come and learn a construction trade. And then our third area of programming is high level, where we provide high levels of mentorship for justice involved youth. And then fourth of what you're going to hear today is how we flex in community. I also sit on the board for Bell Policy. I sit on the board, which is here in Colorado. And I also sit on the board, Board Bound, which helps women rethink about their voice on boards. And so thank you for this opportunity and to allow me to share.
Right on. Let's go over to Dr. Mathis.
Yes, so I echo all Sade's sentiments. Thank you again for the invitation to speak with you and all of those who are tuning in. I certainly appreciate the invitation. So I am Dr. Christopher Mathis. Chris Mathis, you won't call for this conversation. You're not my students. And so I primarily focus on areas of reparations, higher education, critical race theory, et cetera, and how we can use the legal canon as tools as a way to move the agenda forward. And my particular agenda is acquiring and make sure that we're succeeding legally and long-term, right, reparations in the higher education world. Oftentimes, I think that these institutions oftentimes promulgated a lot of the wrongs that exist today. And so it is my job as a scholar, as an activist, as a legal activist, to think about how we can use the legal landscape as a means to move forward.
Right on. Thank you so much for being here. Eric.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Ross, and each of you. I'm honored as well to be here. Eric McDonnell. By day, I am principal for Peacock Partnerships, really centering the unleashing of leaders to change the world for good. And so I focus on executive coaching, leadership development, support C-suite leaders and their teams around strategy, and really moving critical agendas that, again, are reshaping our communities. And so excited to do that. And then by night, I put on my cape and I become the chair of the San Francisco African American Reparations Advisory Committee. I'm a native San Franciscan, so this is near and dear to my heart. And we can talk more about all that entails, but I'm excited to be here in this conversation. Thank you.
Right on. Well, again, welcome you all. And again, thank you so much for sharing your time and sharing space with all of us. And let's jump right in. When we think about the reparations conversation, it is complex and nuanced at the same time. Some people want to have the conversation, many people don't. And so, not a lot of people understand exactly what it is we're talking about when we talk about reparations. And so just to get us going, I'd like to just throw out there, let's talk about the what and why. What is reparations? Why is reparation justice important? And from your perspectives, what barriers have we seen to actually advancing this conversation? And so we can just jump right on in.
Well, I would just start really, it is complex, sorry, but made complex by those who would oppose it. Simply put, reparations is the making of amends for wrongs perpetrated on Black folks brought from the African continent to the Americas. And so reparations then is very simply, if you look up Webster's dictionary, says paying money to or otherwise helping those who have been wronged. So it's actually not complicated. We have complicated it because America has yet to own its role in the harm. So it is complicated, but because of those who don't want to support
it. Yeah, I would like to even just jump in there. The word reparations is very scary for people, just because of what you just said. They think of, well, we have to give money to rectify the wrongdoing, instead of thinking of what are the systems that we can put in place to help rectify the wrongdoing. And so you'll probably hear from us, we've probably been asked to not use reparations in trying to move the needle forward. But I agree, it is something that shouldn't be as complex as it is, but it is.
Quite simply, to echo my other co-panelists, it is any meaningful and material sacrifice to remedy the perpetrator's harm. And so it can look like money, but oftentimes, in order to deal wholeheartedly with these problems, much more than money is needed. That is certainly the baseline in which we should have these conversations. Money is the baseline. There are other things that should go into play to repair this generation or multi-generational harm that's persisted on one particular group of people for quite some time.
Yeah, for me, sometimes I just, the KISS method, right? Keep it simple, silly. When you think about the word reparations, the first thing that comes to mind for me is repair. How do we repair what we've done? When we think about, everybody's God-given right to exist, for me, it's all about thriving, right? And so as a chief equity officer in the Colorado Community College system, the thing that I think about when we look at our equity and our justice work, it's really about thriving. Who's not thriving, right? And understanding that everybody has a right to thrive. It's not a privilege. And at some point, we've got to collectively just recognize the sins of America's past and recognize that, like a bad teenager, we can create a redemption story and actually make some work happen. And speaking of work happening, I'd like to start with Sade, but could you share a little bit about the specific work you're doing around reparation and your why, right? Like, I have the honor and privilege of knowing you personally and have known you for years. And so, the work that you're doing with Chic it might align with the reparation work, but it's not necessarily something you had to pick up. So why did you pick up that work? And what successes have you had to date?
I've been asked this often. There's a couple of points that I want to point out. We really got rooted in this work due to the pandemic, due to the death of Ahmaud Arbery, due to the death of George Floyd, where multiple times as a community servant, we got pulled into conversations and there wasn't anything that was with action, right? And then just going back to like, how do we right the wrong? And you have to go back to the beginning of where we were promised. And so I think about William T. Sherman in January of 1865, when it was the initial discussion of reparations, right? Of the 40 acres in the mill. The mill is a little questionable. We'll talk about that. But where the 40 acres were promised to Black folks. And I try to tell people, imagine what it would have been like if we would have had access to land, if we could have tilled our own farm and sold. So, and then you start to build into where are we at today? And so we just took a stab at it, right? The reason why we are focusing on educational justice for Black Coloradans is because I was a student that graduated with $62,000 worth of debt. And I want to share a statistic with you all of why this is important. It says that post-secondary debt is racially inequitable, right? 20 years later, after a Black person takes out a loan, we still own 95% of that debt, compared to a white constituent who has paid off 94% of their debt. And so when you think about economic mobility, I look at this is it. And I look at these are the systems that continue to harm Black folks, education. And Dr. Ross, like, education is just the beginning of where we're at. We understand that once we get a commission, once we do a racial justice study, that there are going to be other things that come to light. We'll be talking about healthcare. We'll be talking about housing. We'll be talking about our judicial system. right? But education is where we started, because this is something that we should have for free. And so I think, and these are why we are here, is because the harms that have been done to Black folks. And instead of looking to the left or to the right to see who's going to start, we said we're going to do something today.
Right on. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And as somebody who has done a lot of education myself and am actively paying off loans, the very thing that should unite or ignite somebody's success and fuel somebody forward has actually become, for many people, another form of enslavement, right? 2 steps forward, 6 steps backwards, if you will. And so I appreciate the work. Eric, so you're out in San Francisco. You've got a really great practice in terms of the work that you do, in terms of leadership development, building leaders, having people think strategically, solving problems. And then you jump out and do your civic duty to serve the citizens of San Francisco, and you become the chair of this reparations committee. And thinking about that, this comes, I mean, you're doing this for free, right? Like, you're not getting paid for this. You're probably working 70, 80 hours in another area. So why are you doing this work? Why is it important to you? And could you talk a little bit about some of the success you guys have had?
Absolutely. Again, thanks for having me be a part of this conversation. For me, it's part of a growing chorus, right, across the country of reparations work across many strands. And so it's an exciting time. So kind of my origin story is I'm a native San Franciscan. And the reason I'm a native San Franciscan is because Lottie Varnado, my mother, fled the Jim Crow South when she was 15 years old. Would not stand it anymore. And she came to out west, as many did, fleeing those atrocities that were being perpetrated on them. This is all post-emancipation, so this wasn't slavery, but it was just as bad. And so that's why I'm born here. And so I have lived my life experiencing the tale of two cities. There is a San Francisco that is wealthy and thriving. We have perhaps the largest population of million and billionaires in any part of the country. So parts of San Francisco are doing really, really well. But I grew up in the Fillmore, and Black folks lived in the Fillmore, in the Bayview Hunters Point, in Potrero Hill, the places we were segregated to live. And so I know of the discrimination and the differences that were created. It's interesting because I went to school in all the neighborhoods because I was bused. And so I had firsthand exposure to the disparities that existed. And so when this work became present here in San Francisco, it didn't take much to get me involved, and wasn't my goal to be chair. I just wanted to be a part of a movement that was trying to do right by Black folks here in San Francisco. And so here we are. We have spent the last 18 months, as the charter called for, standing up a committee charged with chronicling the harm. And so we've done 18 months of chronicling the harm. We like to say gathering the receipts and bringing them forward, and then recommending a reparations plan to the city. We finished the draft back in December of last year, presented it to the Board of Supervisors. Things were, relatively speaking, quiet until the Chronicle ran an article on January 15th. And I know that date because, forgive my language, but all hell broke loose. Media across the entire country just went crazy. How dare you all suggest that Black folks get anything, let alone money and repair, access to health care and economic empowerment and justice? How dare you? And culminated with, I got a 3-minute and 14-second voicemail. This gentleman from Lexington, Kentucky found my cell phone number and decided he would tell me what he really thought of me and this work. I'll spare you the gory details, but just very ugly. The success is, one, that we are having a conversation we've never had in San Francisco, both about the challenges and the plight of many Black San Franciscans to this day. But we're also now talking very substantively with members of the Board of Supervisors, the mayor's office, about money aside, all of the policy and legislative work that can go into creating greater access and opportunity for Black folks in San Francisco. And so while the headline read, San Francisco wants to give $5 million to every Black San Franciscan who's eligible, what they completely ignored was our report is 111 recommendations in education, in policy, in health, and in economic empowerment, because we were intent upon doing three things. One, repairing the harm, as I've already talked about. Two, interrupting the harms that are continuing to be perpetrated, many of them through policy and practice. And then finally, putting Black folks on a path to generational wealth. Fundamentally, in addition to the destruction of lives and property, the pathways were destroyed for Black folks and never really recreated except on our own. And so we believe San Francisco owes Black San Franciscan, and so we want to hold them accountable.
Yeah, and it's funny when you talked about January 15th, because it did hit the fan, and while people were, telling you, how dare you, I was like, did we just become best friends? Because that was the first time I heard about you and was like, I've got to meet this brother and see what's happening, what the work is, and yeah, I was just like, yeah, this is amazing. It's bold, it's innovative, and that brings me, speaking of bold and innovative, it brings me to Dr. Mathis, right? So, when I think about you as a fellow educator, I think about the T word, right? Tenure. I think about what that means as a faculty person, and sometimes getting in good trouble doesn't necessarily lead to tenure. And so I'm just curious on a one-off, what has that been like for you? In addition to, why have you committed? Why is this your research? Why is this your passion? And what are some of the successes that you've had?
Well, so I just want to pause and go back to Eric's comment and say, you must be doing something right? If people are attacking you, that means something is going right and you're moving in the right direction. So keep going, keep going. But to answer the question right on its head, like why this matters for me, there's all these noble answers one could choose that I think Sade and Eric also lifted. But for me and my family, it's very selfish. Right? I have a very selfish reason as to why I chose this movement. Because I'm from Columbia, South Carolina, and my family, my great-grandfather, my great-grandmother was unable to attend law school in South Carolina because of the race of their skin. Their neighborhood was decimated by University of South Carolina's growth in Columbia. Cherry Hill neighborhood was decimated. And so that affected not only me, but everyone that came before me. And so those actionable, tangible things that the university committed onto my ancestors matters to me. And so, and realizing that truth, I recognize that this happened across the country, particularly in the Southeast. I'll give you like this one statistic out of University of Georgia, where they decimated, swaths of Black running successful neighborhoods for luxury dormitories. And so, now that current land value is now worth more than $76 million with a return of investment of about 35,000%. So that decimation of that land to build a dormitory, we certainly don't know the value of what the land would be now. We're unable to do that math. But what we do know is that the land will be worth more now than it was then. And so that story that we see in university harm is particularly important to me. And so because of that, I was very focused on exposing how university harm throughout the Southeast has caused neighborhood decimation, has caused intellectual assault on Black folks. And so because of that, is very selfishly motivated to ensure that my family and the people that came before me are atoned in some way, shape, or form for the harm that the university committed onto them.
That doesn't sound like selfishness to me. That sounds like standing up and protecting your family, and creating a platform for the village. And so kudos to you for the work you're doing, and thank you. And if I understand correctly, some of the work that you've done has led to some legislation or just some movement in several states. And so I'd like you to talk about that and then kind of follow that up with talking about legislation amendments, the Constitution, right? When we think about one of the safest and most secure ways to create change, it's to create legislation, but more importantly, to put it in the Constitution, where typically it can't be removed so easily. And so from a constitutional scrutiny standpoint, could you also kind of share what we should consider as we're engaging in reparation work and thinking about how we move this conversation forward?
Yeah, absolutely. So I, in a new paper, everyone should download, talk about the higher education redress statutes out of Washington and Lee Law Review, details the Southeastern movement in this space, right? And so I am certainly grateful that these statutes exist because to some extent there is an acquiescence to the fact that there was harm, right? That there was harm in these states, and we must repair in some way, shape, or form. And so I'm very happy about them. But in the paper, I expose the many limitations of these statutes and how we can improve them. So we see them across the Southeast. And so I spent a lot of time talking to legislators across states, in states you think would be taking these phone calls. And so we should be very happy that we're at least having these conversations in states where you think that this probably shouldn't, or we're thinking about having these conversations. So I'm very grateful for that. But it is really important for us to examine these statutes for what they are, what they give, what they don't give, so that we can expose, the limitations and both the strength of the statutes. As you talk about like the constitutional scrutiny, I think statutes are only as good as if they withstand judicial scrutiny. We don't want to pass things and then 2 weeks from now or a year from now, the court strike them down. So I think it's imperative that we talk about, particularly in my field, education, justice, and higher education reparations at the state constitutional level and not the federal level, because oftentimes state constitutional levels they govern education in that particular state. And so I think if we are more localized in our solution and not, of course, I would certainly be happy for a federal legislative bill that passed, but because of all the politics that go into that, I'm very hesitant. But I'm more and more, every day I am happy that state constitutions deal with education on this head. And I feel like that's the space that we often can corral around to ensure that our agendas are passing through at the state and local level. And more importantly, I say that because usually the harm looks very different than it does in Colorado, than it did in South Carolina, then in California, and then in New York. And so a federal legislation may miss that nuance, but the state legislation has the opportunity to think about how particularized harm happened in a particular state.
Okay, and so I'm going to swing over to Eric, because just thinking about the localized piece, right, and thinking about it from a state perspective, we're zeroing down to a city perspective in San Francisco, and your recommendations have done and they've been submitted. And so for folks who maybe don't understand the way politics work, the recommendations are still just recommendations at this point. There's still a vote that has to happen. And so could you talk a little bit about that process for you working locally with this committee, elected officials, creating buy-in and I'm sure that you guys are still actively trying to make sure that you've got the votes and the support that you need. And so just as a follow-up to Dr. Mathis and a little bit of a bird walk, could you talk a little bit about that? Oh, and come off mute for me.
Yeah, that's important to come off mute. I would start by saying that the Board of Supervisors in December of 2020. So this was in the aftermath of George Floyd's murder. There was the national and global civic unrest. And so the Board of Supervisors voted unanimously, all 11. We must stand up this charter. We must create a reparations advisory committee, but we'll make them advisory. So they sort of raised their hand, I would say 3/4 of the way, but they did so, and we applaud them for that. And the thing I've said throughout this entire process is, relatively speaking, that vote in 2020 was easy. compared to the vote that is coming up. Because the reality is, now that we have concrete opportunities to take action legislatively, financially, systems and processes, now they have to, endure the realities of what that means for each of them politically, right? Everything from, running for re-election in 2024 when this will be in front of them, and all the other political implications. Not all of their constituents love and endorse this body of work. And so there is that reality. So yes, they have the interim report. Our final report is due in June of this year. We sunset as a committee per the charter, unless they take action in January of 2024. So essentially, we've got under a year, all right, to make the case, solidify the case, and then build enough community and civic will. And that's the work we're doing right now. One hand is continuing to refine the report. The other is really trying to build a coalition that is multi-ethnic, multiracial, that spans the entirety of this city, so that we can bring enough civic and community will to hopefully create some political will to take the actions.
So 400 years of oppression, and you got 2 years to solve the problem, huh?
Swing hard, right? Swing the bat really, really hard and get them to take action. The last thing I'll say really quickly is, and as we have been, as they say, walking the halls, it's been interesting to have many of the Board of Supervisors say to me and others who've been with them, okay, thank you for the plan, but tell us how to pay for it and tell us how to make it sustainable. To which, frankly, we say collectively, we did the heavy lifting, right? We did the research on the harm. We've done the research and assessment of what we believe is appropriate redress and repair. You all hold the responsibility of determining how to make the decisions around investments financially and otherwise. We'll partner, but not our responsibility. You didn't ask us to do a feasibility study. You asked us to chronicle the harm and present a plan, and that's what we've done. So we'll see. We'll see what comes.
Very cool. And so Sade, on similarly, you guys are working at the local level as well. And I would argue that you guys aren't quite at the place where you're looking to present the information and look at the legislative route, although I think that's the direction you're going, trying to have conversations with the governor. What I have recognized is your ability and to attract influencers and to build a really inclusive and broad group of folks. And so could you just talk a little bit about your plan, your approach, and some of the way you built the people to do this work, which I think is going to put you in a position where you're able to make some recommendations and or change some constitutional stuff.
Yeah, and Eric, I have to thank you for the work that you've been doing, because a little bit of my job was to research where are the movements happening in our country and what is the pathway forward. And it's so unfortunate that the solution is form a committee, do the research. And as a Black woman, how much research do we have to continue to do to know the harm that has been done? And I've also been faced with, well, Colorado isn't a slave state, but it doesn't mean that we haven't had slave practices such as segregation, right? And so, yes, Dr. Ross, I think for us, when I, started to do this work, it was like, what are the sectors of bodies that we are going to need to move this work forward, from community members, from higher ed, from attorneys. I've had the pleasure to work with and talk to Dr. Mathis and pick his brain about, like, how do we move it forward? And unfortunately, it is the legislative pathway. Right now, we are in the talks of submitting a late bill to start to look at this research. We are also in the talks of having the governor do an executive order. The crazy thing of even submitting a late bill is the politics that come with it. I have some of the Black caucus is like, why do you have to come to the Black folks? right? Who are your guys' allies that can support this initiative? And these are real conversations, and it might piss off some folks, but there's so much politicking in it. And so I find myself of having to put myself in rooms where you have the attorney general and really hold them to the fire, and talk to incoming mayor candidates about where they stand on doing a racial justice study. I've also been told that before a bill even gets submitted, it might take 2 years, right, before we can even look at it. And I think that that is crazy. And Eric, you were right about, in the wake of George Floyd's death, there was this urgency. Like, we got to get it done now. We got to do something now. But look how times will change in the matter of 2 years. There isn't any urgency. And so, Dr. Ross, yeah, I hope that, we can get a late bill passed, or we're going to lean on our governor. We're going to lean on our attorney general. Something that we have learned about, like, how the attorney general has carried in California, like, some of this initiative, pushing it through. You've seen Governor Newsom just say, we're going to form a committee, we're going to do the study, and we're going to start the conversation to do what's right. And so it is going to be like the civic will and community engagement to push this forward, but it is no easy task. And then also here on us in Colorado, it is, well, if we can't get the legislator to move, what can we do privately? How can we set up scholarships going forward today with those who are willing to get it done? And so there is a two-pronged approach that we are taking, just to address the educational justice for Black Coloradans.
Right on. And so speaking of educational justice, like, that's the lens that you guys chose, Sade. And you talked about this a little bit earlier with your personal experience, but as you put this committee together and people start coming together, why do you think it was like, all right, we're just going to focus on education right now versus workforce development or anything else, housing? I mean, there's so many different lenses for reparations you could look at, and so many different places to start. What was really the spirit around starting with education in Colorado?
Well, if you look at Colorado, we're failing at a national level when it comes to the attainment for Black students, right? You've had so many attempts of, like, maybe, for instance, what COSI is supposed to do, what all these other institutions are supposed to do, and uplift for Black Coloradans. And when you rank us compared to other states, we fail. When we look at, we have an abundance of funds, but Tabor, it messes that up for us. And so that was one of the reasons, right? Like, how do we close the attainment gap for Black folks? It's an initiative at the state level. They keep coming around, we keep forming committees, but we are not moving the pendulum. So outside of it being close to my heart of me being a student, right, who has carried this debt, but looking at, like, how do we close that gap at a state level, right? And so this is a way, and I will say, speaking with higher ed folks, they believe we can get it done. I've had more people in higher ed from CU, MSU, DU, who have said, how can I jump in? How can I support? Emily Griffith Foundation. And so I think it's crazy that there are so many individuals who are running these institutions who understand the gap and who are ready to support, but our state hasn't figured it out yet.
Yeah, well said. And the community college system, we with it, we ready. So
and you.
But no, seriously, thank you for sharing that. Eric, in San Francisco, so obviously, the big to do was, the $5 million recommendation from a compensation standpoint, but you guys also, to your point earlier, have 111 recommendations. Can you kind of talk about the amount of recommendations that you guys have? Are you guys going, as you fine tune the report, do you think those recommendations are going to be lowered? Are you going to keep the 111? And then why did you guys go that big rather than a singular one, two, or three kind of focused approach?
Really great questions. Thank you. One quick comment on the $5 million. Again, that got all the headlines.
Mhm.
If they had just read the very next recommendation, which was bringing all San Franciscans living below the average median income and sustain that over 200 years,
Mm.
far exceeds $5 million an individual, right? They didn't, right? So if they just gone, so the intent, as I said, overall was to create these pathways, right, that would generate wealth. Now, for some, that means bringing them up from where they are, right? And so hence we have recommendations that speak to leveling folks up, if you will, and getting them ready to get on the path. In the educational context, it's all about everything that's been talked about, removing the barriers, creating greater access. We have some of the best educational institutions in the world right here in the Bay Area. And most of our Black and brown students don't have access to them, right? And then in the area of, excuse me, the public policy, really many of our city's institutions have by policy and practice disallowed access to critical services, mental health, just to name one, right? That folks have not had opportunity to even access, let alone thrive in. And so we have just this great distrust of all of our public systems for these reasons. And so again, we identified in each one of those areas I referenced, including health, pathways to accessibility, and really shoring up families so that they could actually thrive with a $5 million investment. The way we have held the $5 million, that it is an investment of capital. It actually, the harm far exceeds that, right? Far exceeds that. And so we saw it as, again, if you do just simple math, in San Francisco, you want a decent house, you're $2 million, right? In San Francisco, you want sustained high quality access to healthcare, right? Again, it is expensive. And so it's a big number in terms of sticker shock, but it's not a big number when it comes to sustaining, right, a family. And so I don't anticipate, one, that we will quote unquote go down. Do I anticipate we might reduce the number of recommendations? That is possible, because I think what a reality, and Sade referenced it a couple of times, the politics of it all will come down to some negotiation, right? And so right now, each of the committees are working on prioritizing, right? I've said to them, literally, identify the top 10, right? So that maybe we're going with 40, right? That becomes more amenable to a political conversation, but that critically moves Black families forward. So that's the work we're doing right now. That's part of what we're vetting as we walk the halls at City Hall and trying to ascertain what's the path. What I am leery of, quite frankly, is that we compromise our way back down to little or nothing. And there was some pressure, even from the Black community. Let's take the $5 million off the table. Let's figure out the number that we can get, quote unquote, get away with, or get by, get through. And I understand it. I'm not being critical of them at all. Particularly for those who are right now, as we speak, really hurting.
Right.
And they need relief now. And if fighting for $5 million causes them not to get relief now, I understand it. And so we're trying to find that, for lack of a better term, sweet spot, that it is politically feasible, and while at the same time, it doesn't lower, frankly, the value. Part of what is really clear in the body of this work is this is about the value of Black folks, right? Owning the harm caused to them, owning the harm that you've caused, and recognizing the value of literally our very presence. We've gone from about 14% of the population in San Francisco, we're down to about 4.5 today as we speak. And if things continue, it'll continue to decline. So we're trying to lift up, right, an overall plan that allows folks to be fortified financially and otherwise, and then thrive in this city.
Yeah. Dr. Mathis, like there are folks out there who, I mean, it's beyond me when I hear it, but people literally say things like, oh, this happened 150 years ago, or hey, the people who are currently in the seat aren't responsible for paying this back. It's unfortunate. We feel bad. There's empathy, but you need to get over it, right? Individual people created oppression, not the government. So why is the government responsible for paying this back, and so on and so forth? Many things like that. To folks who are ignorant in that way, what do you tell them? What do you say to them?
Right. So I think what I talk about in the paper does so well. Like, these statutes deal with those problems on their head, and they still were passed, right? So they deal with the issues of statute of limitations, or, well, the harm is too far ago, all those traditional things that people say not to have the conversation surrounding reparations. So I say, quite frankly, to them, that's not what the law says. Like, we can talk about these things that are 150 years ago, that are 100 years ago. The tools may look different now, today, than they were then, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't have the conversation. You may not like what I'm saying, but the tools are there for us to use. So that's why I'm a big advocate, right, for us knowing what type of harm we want to be repaired, right? We have to know what is our non-negotiable when we are in these conversations, because state legislations have the power to create and write and legislate on specific things, right? And so we ourselves as a community have to know what that is, and it can withstand the traditional foolishness that people throw at reparations, like statute of limitations, like proximate causation, these issues that people bring up all the time. This is too far in the past. But we've seen in these 4 examples in both Florida, Virginia, Georgia, and also the 4th state, which is slipping my mind right now, right, who they deal with these issues on their head. They engage with those same traditional issues that people say we cannot do, and pass the statute. And people are feeling those reparations now. And so it can be done, and they are atoning. They're not atoning for harm that happened last year, or atoning for harm that happened 10 years ago. They're atoning for harm that happened 50 years ago, some even 100 years ago, back to enslavement at University of Virginia, right? So people are dealing and grappling with these issues regardless of the traditional, naysayers saying, well, it wasn't me, it was my great whomever, right? But it doesn't matter. It really does not matter. We can still atone for the harm that's never been remedied.
Yeah. Yeah, Eric or Sada, anything to add on that? What do you tell people when you hear things like that as you're doing the work?
I quote Ta-Nehisi Coates when they held the congressional hearing back in 2019. Ta-Nehisi said, 250 years of slavery, 90 years of Jim Crow, 60 years of separate but equal, 35 years of racist housing policy. This wasn't just slavery. It was the tentacles of slavery, the vestiges of slavery that have continued throughout the lifetime of this country. And so harms continue to this day. And so I invite folks to debate that harms don't continue, because in fact they do. And if the harms continue, then redress is appropriate. The last thing I'll say is what I finished by saying is centuries of harm should be met with centuries of repair. It's really that simple.
That part. Sada, anything for you?
I invite people to watch Kimberly Jones speak about what it is, what 450 years of playing Monopoly looks like, what that looks like.
Right.
When you have been captivated, you cannot go ahead and play the game. And when you do play the game, they come back down and burn it and tell you to play it a different way. And so if anybody needs to, I encourage them, please watch it. Please see it. And then let's have a conversation and do the research. Do the research. We are here to right what's been done wrong. And if we do not do that as a society, we broke the social contract.
Right.
We broke it. This is our time as generational leaders to change and to shift. But please, if you have not seen, I would say YouTube, Kimberly Jones, it's a very powerful spin on monopoly.
Right on, thank you. So, I have actually a standing conversation with some sitting CDOs, chief development or chief diversity officers, and that conversation centers around just how lonely the work can be, sometimes how dangerous the work can be, how you feel like you're on an island, and just how hard the work can be. And that's just doing general diversity, equity, and inclusion work. We see what's happening out there with people talking about critical race theory, trying to literally just stop any kind of justice movement, justice initiated conversation, trying to stop it in its track. And so I imagine that it's one thing to be doing the diversity, equity, inclusion work. And I think there's another layer to be doing something very specific in that work, right? And reparations is one of those. And so as I say that, the question is what are you guys doing to take care of yourself? How can people support you? And what are you experiencing? And we'll just, whoever wants to jump in first, go ahead.
So I feel like for me personally, if I'm not getting hate mail, then I'm not doing something right. So I really, so when I publish a piece, when I look at a piece, I wait, right, on people. I want the discourse. I want to be able to sit down from people who we disagree with, do it in a professional, academic way, preferably, but sometimes it doesn't come across that way, but we deal with it as it comes. And so for me, it's one of those things where it comes along with the territory. You have to be willing to fight. And that's a part of the territory in which we're entering. You can't be a coward and say, well, woe is me. They're throwing stones at me. Well, I mean, that's the part of the territory. And so that's kind of how I deal with it. I certainly self-care, take care of myself by taking space and time, also engaging with other folks like Sade and Eric who are doing this work, and like calling each other, checking on each other, retreating together, etc. Because you need time and space. Every hero needs their own a rest break, and so I feel like everyone, whatever that rest looks like for you, take it, because you can't do the job if you're tired.
Right. Eric, Sade, what are you guys? What are your thoughts there?
Go ahead, Sade. I'll follow you.
This is not easy work. I have to be honest. I have cried doing this work because I'm like, we will not talk about Black people like they are just an object or a subject matter. Like, we're going to talk about them like there is their life that is being breathed through them. But I'm also with Dr. Mathis. I welcome the conversations, even the most difficult ones about it, of why it's important. And I'm okay with shaking shit up. I'm okay with stepping into this and saying, listen, y'all, it's not going to be easy for you. It's not easy for me. So get comfortable of being uncomfortable, because I always have been. And I think that they're important to breathe, right? To take the step away and to breathe of what that looks like. In my last interaction with Dr. Mathis, he reminded me of why the civil rights movement worked across the nation. And it was because of the collaboration that needs to happen. And so I think we're at a point of we need to take what we are doing and collaborate collectively and push the pendulum, instead of individually doing this for each of our states. We need to create and lay the framework. And so I tell anybody, have the conversation with those who are uncomfortable about it, starting with your children, starting with your educators, starting with your neighbors. That's where advocacy starts, is with dialogue. And there's one thing, we can agree to disagree, but we got to find alignment. We got to find alignment, and we're not going to do that unless we have the conversation.
So one of the things that I do for myself is I like to cycle outdoors. And so for me, miles are my meditation. However, here's what I experienced not too long ago. Rode down the peninsula, got a flat tire. So I text my wife saying, hey, when you get a minute, when you get a break, come pick me up. Told her I was going to be at a Starbucks. I'm at Starbucks, as they say, minding my own self's business, head down, reading news on my phone. This woman walks up to me and gets about this close, about 5 feet away, and yells, "All lives matter. All lives matter." Why is this lady tripping? What, like I'm minding. And then I remembered I had a Black Lives Matter mask on. And so she was responding to the mask. And I'll be transparent here and say, I wasn't up for it. And so all I did was said, she then said, "Oh, you're a good Black." I couldn't even get back on my bike and ride because I had a flat tire. Quite literally, I went through this cycle of, do I want my wife to pick me up from here? And it wasn't funny, or from jail, right? And I had to do the woo-saw moment, let her get away from me. So the work is hard. It is very hard. But one, as Dr. Mathis pointed out, is to be expected. I'm in it to win it. So if it means I got to endure some challenges and some difficulties, okay. I'm not quitting. I'm not turning around. I'm certainly not going to shut up because this is transformative work for my people. And the last thing I'll say is this Sunday, I've tried to find as many spaces that are nourishing. This Sunday over in Oakland, the 6th annual Black Joy Parade. This is the 6th year of Black Bay Area coming together. So I'm looking forward to that rejuvenating space with folk that love our people.
Right on. Well, I could do this all day. You guys are phenomenal. And I am, I believe in energy transference. And so, and I think that the way that we continue to get energy to do all the work that we do is to connect with those who are doing like-minded things, and the sharing and transferring information fills my cup. And so I just want to say thank you for doing that. Thank you so much for being here. And we appreciate your work. If you would put in the chat the way people could reach you, email, social media, that would be awesome. And then to everybody who is on, I want to remind you of the Global Minded Conference, June 7th through the 9th, right? Because these kinds of conversations are going to be there. We're going to be curating these kinds of spaces. I'm hoping to have several conversations like this at the conference. And so I would love to see or meet some of you in person, just to say thank you for caring about this work, tuning in every month. And to Dr. Mathis, to Eric, Sade, thank you. And again, everybody, follow them, get with them, see how you can be helpful, but most importantly, share the information. And everybody, read Dr. Mathis's paper, right? Like that, the information is, man, you want to be armed with the information, read the paper. We can do a book club or an article club on that thing if you want to. I'm sure he'd come back and break it down and let us ask questions after we've read it. So with that being said,
read and cite.
Cite. Yeah, we go. Give him credit. Give
read,
credit where credit
cite,
is due.
share.
But anyways, thank you guys so much for being with us today. And I'm going to turn it back over to Carol at Global Minded. As always, Carol, thank you for what you do, and KPMG and the other sponsors who make this possible for us to come together.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you. And I will just say, I think one of the most amazing things about the Global Minded community, last year at the conference, we had 300 speakers, 74% of them were diverse. And it's a place where so many of our leaders like you can be connected to other people you haven't met yet, who can then fill you up, and then they become some of your equity teams for the important work that you all are doing in your different areas. And so I think all of us can really teach the nation and the world how to do radical collaboration, because that's the only way we can solve some of these really, really pernicious problems that we're facing, like the housing and the people experiencing homelessness and the hunger and the various things happening. So thanks to all of you, and we look forward to growing this community with you and to being able to 10x the work that each of you do. And thanks so much for your time today for this community. Thank you. Have a good one. We'll share the link so you can share it with your networks tomorrow. And we'll also make sure we put Chris's paper in there as well. Thanks, everybody. Have a good one. Bye.
All right. Happy Black History Month, everyone. But remember,
See you next month.
keep celebrating Black history. All right, y'all. Peace.
Every day, every way. Thanks, guys. Thank you, Ryan. I'm so excited you can come to our lunch.
Me
Okay,
too.
so we're going to catch up there. I'm going to sit
All right.
next to you.
Okay.
Okay, we can get some things done at lunch.
All right.
Bye.